The rent was the first and only miracle I'd ever experienced. A figure so low for a whole house, it felt like a clerical error I had to capitalize on before anyone noticed. My apartment had grown teeth lately, not literally, but the noises at night had graduated from the typical settling groans to distinct, wet shuffling sounds behind the walls, and my landlord's solution was to suggest I play white noise louder. So when I saw the listing for the two-bedroom Craftsman on Alder Lane, with its picture of a sun-drenched porch and promise of quiet, I didn't question the catch, I just called. The agent who met me was a man named Carter, though he only offered that information after a long pause, as if recalling a name he rarely used. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in a black suit that seemed to drink the afternoon light, and his handshake was cool and brief. He showed me through the house with a quiet efficiency, pointing out the original hardwood, the refurbished clawfoot tub, the new refrigerator with a voice that held no inflection, no salesman's pitch. The house was beautiful in a forgotten way, filled with soft light and the smell of lemon polish, and, underneath it all, a faint, earthy scent like a forest after rain. I was already sold, my mind painting pictures of book-filled shelves and quiet mornings. We concluded the tour back in the empty living room, and as he handed me the lease and a single brass key, he fixed me with a gaze so steady it felt like a weight. "There is one rule for living here," he said, his words dropping into the quiet room like stones in a deep well. "It is not a suggestion from the landlord, it is a condition of tenancy, and your safety depends upon it." I must have smiled then. A nervous twitch of the lips expecting a warning about loud parties or proper recycling. Never, under any circumstances, acknowledge the man in the driveway. He will be there. You will see him. But you must not look at him. You must not nod at him. You must not speak to him or of him. Go about your business as if he is not there. He is harmless, but only if you follow this rule perfectly. A cold knot, small but undeniable, tightened in my stomach. "What man?" I asked, my voice thinner than I intended. The agent did not blink. "Just remember the rule." He turned and left, closing the front door with a soft but final click, leaving me alone in the silence of my new home with a key in my hand and a strange directive echoing in my head. I pushed it aside, the exuberance of a fresh start overwhelming a vague, silly warning. The man was probably just eccentric, or maybe it was a metaphor for ignoring neighborhood drama. I moved in the following weekend, my possessions seeming scant and lonely in the spacious rooms. The first 2 days were idyllic. The house felt like a sanctuary, the quiet so profound I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from 2 rooms away. Sunlight traced slow paths across the floors. I saw no one in the driveway, just the cracked concrete path flanked by 2 overgrown yew bushes that formed a sort of tunnel toward the detached garage. It was on the evening of the 3rd day that I first saw him. I was in the kitchen, washing the single plate and glass I'd used for dinner, looking out the window above the sink, which offered a perfect view of the driveway's length. The sun was dipping below the garage roof, painting everything in long, distorted shadows. Movement, or rather the absence of it, caught my eye. At the very end of the driveway, where it met the sidewalk, a man stood. He was tall and unnaturally slender, wearing a long dark coat that fell to his ankles and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. He stood perfectly still, facing the house, not turned toward the street as if waiting for transportation. He was simply there, a statue placed at my property line. My breath caught. The agent's words returned with the force of a slap. I turned away from the window so quickly I sloshed water onto the floor. I focused on drying the plate, my hands unsteady, polishing it long after it was dry. I counted to 100 slowly, my ears straining for any sound from outside. When I finally, cautiously, peered back out, the driveway was empty. My heart was pounding. I spent the rest of the night trying to convince myself it had been a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the yew bushes thrown into a humanoid shape by the setting sun. But the shadow theory evaporated the next morning. He was there again, this time positioned halfway up the driveway, standing beside the right-hand yew bush. The morning light was clear and harsh, leaving no room for optical illusions. I could see the texture of his coat, a heavy, rough-looking fabric like wool, though it seemed too thick for the mild weather. The hat shaded his face completely, but his posture was clear, hands at his sides, feet together, that absolute, preternatural stillness. I froze, the cereal box in my hand forgotten. The rule. I forced my eyes down to the counter, to my bowl. I poured the cereal with exaggerated care, the sound absurdly loud in the quiet kitchen. I got the milk from the refrigerator, my movements slow and deliberate. I did not look out the window. I carried my bowl to the small kitchen table, which was out of direct line of sight, and ate, tasting nothing, my ears tuned to the silent house and the world outside. After 20 minutes, I ventured a glance. He was gone. A pattern established itself over the following weeks. His appearances were random, unpredictable. Sometimes he would be a distant sentinel at the curb as I left for work in the morning. Sometimes I would wake in the deep, blue hour before dawn, compelled to look out my bedroom window, and find him a pale smudge in the gloom, standing directly under the motion-activated security light that never seemed to trigger for him. Once, I came home late from a movie to find him positioned right next to my car door, and I had to sit in the driver's seat for a full 30 minutes, pretending to be engrossed in my phone, until I felt enough time had passed that I could get out and walk to the house without seeming to notice the dark figure 2 feet away. It was a terrifying ballet, a performance of normalcy staged for an audience of one. I learned the subtleties of non-acknowledgement. It wasn't just about not looking directly. It was about the quality of the indifference. A quick, startled glance was as bad as a stare. I had to feel his presence and consciously redirect my attention with a calm, internal pivot. I developed rituals. Upon seeing him, I would immediately begin a mundane internal monologue. The grass needs cutting. I should really organize the pantry. I need to call my mother. I would then physically enact that thought, going to find the lawnmower manual or pulling out cans of soup to rearrange, my back to the window. I started calling him the neighbor in my mind, a bland, harmless label to defang the terror. My life became divided into 2 tracks. The normal track of work, groceries, laundry, and the hidden track of this constant, silent vigilance. For a while, it worked. He would appear, I would perform my ritual of ignorance, and he would eventually be gone. The house remained peaceful, even comforting. Then, about a month in, the environment began to change. It started with the sounds, but not from outside. From inside. The first time I heard it, I was reading in bed. It was a soft, rhythmic tap-tap-tap coming from the ceiling directly above me. It sounded like a single knuckle rapping gently on the other side of the plaster. It would go for a few seconds, stop for a minute, then start again. I told myself it was the house settling, pipes expanding or contracting. But the rhythm was too deliberate. I went into the attic with a powerful flashlight. The space was empty, save for a fine layer of insulation and dust that showed no footprints but my own. No pipes ran through that section. No wires. I went back downstairs, and the tapping started again an hour later. Then, my belongings began to shift. I am a person of habit. I leave my keys in a small ceramic bowl on the entryway table. One Tuesday, they were on the kitchen counter. I chastised myself for my forgetfulness. The next day, my favorite coffee mug, always left on the right side of the sink to dry, was on the left. A book I was reading migrated from the armchair to the dining table. Small things, easily explained by a tired mind. But then I found the first pile. It was on the floor of my closet, a small, neat mound of dark, damp soil mixed with fragmented pine needles and decaying oak leaves. It smelled powerfully of wet earth and deep woods, that same scent I'd noticed on moving day, but stronger, richer, wrong for indoors. I cleaned it up, bewildered. Had I tracked it in? My shoes were clean. The next day, A similar pile was in the bathtub. Then one appeared on the seat of my desk chair. They were always cold to the touch, and the chill seemed to linger in the air of the room long after I'd disposed of the soil. The house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a vessel that was slowly being filled with something else, something from outside. The gentleman's appearances became more frequent, his locations more intrusive. He began to appear not just in the driveway, but in my peripheral vision through other windows. The living room window that looked onto the side yard. The bathroom's frosted glass pane. He was always there, a dark slash against the green, always still, always facing the house. The rule felt thinner, more fragile, like ice over a deep lake. I began to have trouble sleeping. When I did sleep, my dreams were not of him, but of the house. In the dreams, I would be going about my normal routine, but the rooms would be ever so slightly wrong. The hallway would be longer. The door to the basement, which in reality was a simple painted wood door, would be a heavy, iron-banded thing in my dreams, and from behind it would come the smell of wet soil and the sound of that gentle, patient tapping. I started researching the house, digging through online county records in the dead of night. The house was built in 1921. The ownership history was a long, unbroken line until the 1990s, when it began to change hands every few years. No records of any tragedy, no news stories. It was just a house. I considered calling the agent Carter, but what would I say? The man you told me not to acknowledge is still there, and now my house has dirt in it. He would think I was crazy or worse, violating the lease by acknowledging the problem. The breaking point came on a Sunday. I had slept poorly again and was making coffee in a haze. I wandered into the living room and stopped dead. There, on the large picture window that faced the front yard, was writing. It wasn't etched in the glass, nor was it something smeared on the outside. It was as if the very molecules of the window had reconfigured themselves into words of fine, gray, silty text that seemed to hover within the pane. The script was elegant, looping, and utterly alien. It said, "Your attention is appreciated." I didn't scream. I didn't run. A deep, quiet horror settled into my bones, a cold certainty. This was communication. The performance was over. He knew I was playing a part. The rule had never been a shield. It had been a script, and I had been reading my lines. But now the play was changing. I sank onto the sofa and stared at the words until my vision blurred. They faded after an hour, not vanishing but slowly dissolving as if absorbed back into the glass. That was the day I stopped going outside. I called in sick to work, citing a prolonged illness. I closed all the blinds and curtains, plunging the house into a perpetual twilight. I lived by the light of lamps. I could still feel him out there, a constant, silent pressure against the walls of my home. The indoor phenomena escalated. The tapping in the ceiling became a scraping, a slow, grating drag as of something heavy being pulled across the attic floor. The piles of soil were now daily occurrences, sometimes containing small, smooth white stones that looked eerily like river rocks, though there was no river for miles. One morning, I found a single, fresh, vibrant red maple leaf, out of season, placed precisely in the center of my pillow. The writing returned, not just on the windows, but on the bathroom mirror, on the glossy surface of the stove, always the same elegant script. The messages grew more familiar. You are a conscientious tenant. The quiet suits you. We are closer now. I stopped cleaning the soil away. What was the point? The house was no longer mine. I was a guest, and an increasingly unwelcome one. I knew I had to leave, but a profound, irrational fear anchored me. Leaving meant going out there, past him, into a world where the rules were unknown. And somehow, deep down, I feared that crossing the property line while he was watching would be the ultimate acknowledgement of final, unforgivable breach. I became a ghost in my own home, moving silently from room to room, jumping at every creak, watching the curtains for signs of that dark shape beyond. My food ran low. My phone, which had never gotten good signal in the house, went completely dead. The landline, which I'd never used, emitted only a soft, rustling static like leaves in a breeze. I was isolated, a prisoner by my own terror. The end began on a night with no moon. The house was so dark I could barely see my hand in front of my face. The scraping in the attic had been constant for hours, a relentless, abrasive sound that set my teeth on edge. And then it stopped. The silence that followed was heavier, more threatening than the noise. I was sitting on the floor in the living room, my back against a wall, trying to breathe slowly. Then I heard a new sound. A key, scratching into a lock. It came from the front door. The slow, deliberate grind of metal against metal. I had the only key. The agent had the other, he said. The scratching stopped. The deadbolt turned with a solid, oily clunk. The doorknob began to rotate. I scrambled to my feet, my heart a frantic drum in my throat. The door did not open. Instead, from the narrow crack beneath it, something began to seep inside. It was dark, darker than the room. A viscous, shadowy substance that looked like liquid earth. It flowed in with a soft, wet sigh, spreading across the hardwood floor, carrying with it the smell of deep, cold soil and rotting roots. It pooled and began to crawl toward me, not like water, but with a slow, deliberate purpose. I backed away, toward the kitchen, my socks damp from the advancing tide. It followed. It was coming from under the door, an impossible volume of black, loamy material. I turned and ran through the kitchen to the back door, my only other exit. I grabbed the knob, twisted, and pulled. It was locked, the key long since misplaced. I yanked at it, slammed my shoulder against the solid wood. It didn't budge. I turned. The black soil was flowing into the kitchen now, covering the floor, climbing the legs of the chairs. And standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room was the gentleman. He was inside. His long coat dripped with the same black substance. His hat was still low, but here in the close darkness of my house, I could see more of what lay beneath. The lower half of his face was visible, a chin and jaw that were sharp and pale, the skin tight like parchment over bone. His lips were a thin, dark line. He did not move toward me. He simply stood, blocking my retreat as the silent flood of earth filled the room. It was over my ankles now, cold and clinging. I was going to be buried alive in my own home. In that moment of pure, crystallizing panic, the rule shattered completely. I looked directly at him, into the shadow under that brim, and I spoke, my voice a raw, broken thing. "What do you want?" The effect was instantaneous. His head tilted, a sharp, mechanical motion. The rustling static, the sound of dead leaves, filled the room, emanating from him, from the walls, from the very soil around my feet. It coalesced into words in my mind, bypassing my ears. Acknowledgement requires reciprocation. The soil was at my calves, its cold weight pulling me down. I had acknowledged him. The first rule was broken, and a new one was invoked. "What does that mean?" I screamed, not with my voice but with my thoughts, struggling against the rising tide. "The house is occupied," the rustling voice replied. "You are a guest. Guests must be welcomed properly, or they must become part of the foundation." The soil was at my knees. I understood then, with a horrible clarity. The rule wasn't to protect me from him. It was to protect me from the property itself, from whatever ancient, hungry thing resided here. By not acknowledging him, I maintained the fiction of being a temporary, passive occupant. But by seeing him, by letting his presence affect me, by the house reacting to my fear, I had deepened the connection. And now, by speaking to him, I had finalized the contract. I was either a welcomed guest, whatever that entailed, or I was fertilizer. The gentleman extended a hand toward me. His fingers were long, pale, and too articulate. The soil stopped rising. It held me fast, but did not climb further. This was the choice. Take his hand, and accept whatever welcome he offered, or sink into the dark, cold earth and join the others who had failed to follow the rule. I thought of the previous owners, the rapid turnover. I thought of the agent's flat, warning eyes. This was the catch. The low rent was a lure. The rule was the hook. And I was well and truly caught. Tears of terror and resignation stunned my eyes. I looked from that outstretched, skeletal hand to the blank darkness under his hat. There was no escape. To become part of the foundation. The image was too final, too terrible. With a sob that was half aghast, I reached out my own trembling, dirt-stained hand. Our fingers did not touch. As my hand neared his, the substance he was made of seemed to unravel. The gentleman dissolved into a swirling cloud of dry leaves, loam, and shadow. The static rustle rose to a crescendo inside my skull. 1,000 whispering voices saying, "Welcome." The black soil around me surged upward not as a flood, but as a gentle embrace, flowing over my legs, my torso, my arms. The soil was not cold anymore. It was neutral, a comfortable, quiet temperature, like slipping into a bath that perfectly matches your skin, a seamless transition from one state of being to another. It covered my shoulders, my neck, my chin with a gentle, firm pressure that promised an end to struggle, an end to the frantic beating of my heart and the dizzy whirl of panic in my mind. I did not struggle. There was no air to breathe, but I found I did not need to breathe. The need itself, that fundamental, desperate urge, simply dissolved, replaced by a slow, rhythmic pulse that was not my own, but belonged to the ground, to the structure above it. The soil closed over my head, and the world became dark, soft, and silent. But this was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of profound fullness, of being packed tightly into a meaningful space. I was not buried. I was integrated. The sensation was impossible to describe with my old human vocabulary. It was not seeing, but I was aware. It was not hearing, but I perceived vibrations. My consciousness didn't end. It unraveled, expanding in thin, delicate filaments through the dense, packed earth, threading between stones and old, forgotten roots, seeping up through the crumbling mortar of the foundation and into the very bones of the house. I could feel the house around me, not as walls and floors, but as a living, breathing entity. I felt its aches, the slow, arthritic groan of a floorboard in the hall that had borne weight for a century, the subtle sigh of a window frame swelling with the night's humidity. I could feel the roots of the yew bushes in the driveway as if they were my own capillaries, drawing moisture from the deep, cool earth. And I could feel the deep stones of the foundation, their ancient, patient coolness a bedrock for everything above. I could feel the slow warp of the wooden beams overhead, a tired stretching after so many years of holding up the sky. And I could feel him, the gentleman, not as a separate being, but as a pattern, a recurring phenomenon at the edge of the property, a symptom of the house's deep, quiet hunger for attention, for acknowledgement. He was a focal point, a lure cast by the property itself, a shape that the silence and the fear of those within conjured into being. He was a question that demanded an answer, and the rule was the only way to keep the question from being asked aloud. And I could feel the others, faint impressions in the soil under the floorboards, whispers in the dust motes that danced in the attic sunbeams, cold spots in the corners of rooms that never quite warmed. Previous tenants who had chosen differently in that final moment, who had refused the welcome or had broken the rule too completely, too violently. They were not voices, not ghosts, but memories pressed into the fabric of the place, like fossils in shale. A man's stubborn anger was a knot in the wood of the main support post. A woman's sudden, piercing scream was a hairline crack in the bedroom window glass that would reappear no matter how often it was replaced. Their terror was a permanent stain, a kind of psychic fuel. They were quiet, permanent parts of the structure, and now I was among them, yet different. I had chosen the welcome. I was part of the lease agreement, a clause in the fine print that new tenants would never read, but would inevitably fulfill. Days, nights, they lost meaning. Time moved differently here, measured in the growth of moss on the north side of the garage, in the gradual sinking of a paving stone by the back steps, in the slow crawl of sunlight across a carpet until the colors faded. I witnessed the world through the house's senses. I felt the sun warm the roof shingles in the morning, a pleasant, stretching warmth. I heard the rain patter against the windows, 1,000 tiny conversations I could now almost understand. I felt the weight of a black cat that took to napping on the porch swing, its peaceful purr a soft vibration in the wood. The house was never empty, not really. We were always here, a silent congregation. The quiet was not empty, it was occupied. Months passed, or perhaps it was only weeks. The measure was irrelevant. Then, a change, a vibration of intent, of human interest. A car pulled up, and the agent, Carter, emerged, his signature stillness a smaller echo of the gentleman's. He brought people. A young couple, their emotions bright and loud in the quiet atmosphere of the property. Their hope was a sharp citrus scent. Their laughter was a jarring, delightful noise that rattled the old glass in the window panes. I observed from 1,000 points at once. From the dust under the sofa, from the chill behind the refrigerator, from the shadow in the corner of the ceiling. I saw them tour the rooms with Carter. The woman loved the original molding. The man imagined a television on that wall. They saw potential, a future, a story they would write here. They saw a house. They did not see the residence. Then, in the living room, Carter gave his speech. His voice was the same flat monotone. A recorded message played once more. He handed them the keys, and he delivered the line, the only line that ever mattered. Never acknowledge the man in the driveway. The woman laughed, a light, dismissive sound that scraped against my awareness like metal on stone. "Oh, we've had weird neighbors before," she said. "It's probably just old man Jenkins or something." The man nodded, already mentally arranging his furniture, his eyes already glossing over the warning, filed away under eccentricities. I wanted to scream. The impulse was a surge of energy that made a light bulb in the hallway flicker once, briefly. I wanted to rattle the windows, to slam a door, to write in the dust on the floorboards run. But I had no voice. I was part of the quiet. My terror for them was a silent, churning storm confined to the soil and the walls. I could only watch. They signed. They moved in. Their energy was a tsunami compared to my own solitary tenancy. Boxes were dragged, furniture was assembled, arguments were had over where to put the sofa. Laughter echoed in the empty rooms now filling up. I felt their joy, their stress, their vibrant, messy domestic noise. It was life, and for a moment, I felt a pang of my old self, a ghostly limb that still throbbed. The house drank it in, the attention, the acknowledgement of its spaces, the way the woman talked to the walls as she painted, the way the man hammered a nail into a beam to hang a picture. It was all food. And on the third evening, as the sun began to bleed orange and purple behind the garage, I felt the familiar pattern activate within the property's awareness. It was not a thought, but an instinct, a reflex. The house had new occupants. The test must begin. From my place in the walls, in the foundation, I was now part of the system. I directed, or perhaps simply allowed, a trickle of that gathered energy, that latent attention, to flow toward the property line. It was my first conscious act as part of the entity. At the end of the driveway, where it met the sidewalk, the air grew thick, then dark, pulling the lingering twilight into a concentrated shape. It coalesced, drawing substance from the shadow of the yew bush, from the cool air of the coming night, from the silent watchfulness of the house itself. And there, tall, thin, and impossibly still, the figure in the long coat and wide-brimmed hat took form, facing the house. The gentleman was back. The game was reset. I watched from the window, from the very glass itself, as the young man, let's call him Ben, stood at the kitchen sink washing a dinner plate. He was smiling, saying something to his wife in the other room. He glanced up, idly looking out at the evening. His smile died. His body went rigid, his fingers tightening around the wet plate. He saw. He remembered the rule, that silly, throwaway line from the agent. I could feel the jolt of his fear, a bright, sharp, almost electric spark that jumped from him into the atmosphere of the kitchen. It was a nourishing spark. The house sighed, a contented settling of its beams. The man, Ben, turned away quickly, too quickly, pretending to be very interested in the pattern of the dish towel. He was good. He was polite. He was already learning. His wife, Anna, came in, asking what was wrong. "Nothing," he said, his voice too high. "Just thought I saw a raccoon." He did not look out the window again that night. But I could feel his fear festering, a low hum in the background of his thoughts. The gentleman remained for exactly 47 minutes before dissolving back into the gathering night. The ritual had begun. I settled deeper into the foundation, into the soil, a silent guardian of the rule. I watched them. Ben became obsessed with the windows, with checking blinds before Anna came into her room. He started making excuses to go out the back door, avoiding the driveway view. Anna began to notice his tension, his jumpiness. She asked, he lied. The house fed on the secret, on the growing distance between them, on the stolen glances and the manufactured normalcy. Small things started happening for them too. A set of keys moved from a hook to the kitchen table. A cold draft would settle in one spot on the sofa. They found a small, damp pile of mulchy leaves on their bedroom floor one morning, which Ben cleaned up before Anna could see, blaming it on the cat, though they had no cat. The writing appeared for them on the bathroom mirror after a hot shower, not in steam, but in a fine gray film. It said, "Good morning." Anna wiped it away, blaming hard water. Ben knew better. I felt his understanding grow, cold and heavy. He was navigating the same maze I had, but he was not alone, and that made his fear different, more complex. He was afraid for her. That fear was particularly rich. The house on Alder Lane was occupied, and business, as always, was quiet. We watched, we waited, we fed. And I wondered, from my deep, quiet place within the soil, which path they would choose when the walls finally began to bleed dark earth and the gentleman came to call from inside their home. Would they fight? Would they run? Or would one of them, in a moment of desperate love or selfish terror, make a choice and become, like me, a permanent part of the quiet, a new set of eyes in the walls, waiting for the next hopeful souls to sign the lease and hear the rule they would never truly understand until it was far, far too late?